Most people find comfort in the hush of a library. At the Orpheus Athenaeum, you learn very quickly to listen for what the silence is trying to hide. Stepping through the massive, age-darkened oak doors felt less like entering a building, and more like being swallowed whole by a tome bound in granite and shadow. The late summer air outside, thick with Providence humidity, and the faint scent of the nearby river, gave way instantly to something cool, still, and unnaturally silent within. It carried the dense perfume of centuries of accumulated knowledge. Old paper, brittle leather bindings, beeswax polish, layered over a faint, persistent scent of something colder, like damp stone or mineral dust. My name is Olivia Vance, and this imposing institution was, for the foreseeable future, my professional sanctuary. Or perhaps my crucible. As a newly hired consulting archivist, my task was daunting: to impose order on the Athenaeum's legendary, uncatalogued Orpheus family collection. A chance to work with potentially priceless historical documents. Yes, but more importantly for me, a chance to rebuild a reputation meticulously shattered by a single, overlooked archival error at my previous post in Boston. An era involving provenance, a lawsuit, and a quiet dismissal shrouded in academic euphemism. Here, meticulousness would be my watchword, procedure my shield. Miss Eleanor Vance, the head librarian. No relation, a point she'd clarified via concise email before my arrival, awaited me not in a bright office, but in the shadowed grandeur of the main reading room. She stood silhouetted against tall Palladian windows, streaming weak afternoon light, a figure as austere and timeless as the library itself, dressed in severe dark gray wool despite the season. Her posture was ramrod straight, her pale eyes sharp and unnervingly perceptive. She seemed less a librarian and more a high priestess guarding ancient rites. Miss Vance, her voice was low, precise, cutting through the profound quiet without disturbing it. Welcome. Your reputation for detailed analysis precedes you, a quality highly valued at the Athenaeum. Was that a subtle reference to my past failure? Impossible to tell from her impassive expression. The tour was less a welcoming gesture and more a delineation of boundaries. She pointed out the soaring architecture, the rare book room, access by written request only, the locked doors leading to private family archives, distinct apparently from the collection I was hired for, and the vast, echoing main stacks. Her descriptions were factual, clipped, offering little warmth. Finally, back in the hushed echo of the main hall, dominated by a towering, silent grandfather clock of dark, gleaming wood, she presented me with a thin, leather-bound booklet, Athenaeum Procedures, Staff Addendum. The standard operational guidelines are self-explanatory, she stated. This addendum covers procedures unique to the Athenaeum, necessitated by the building's age and particular sensitivities. They are not optional. She fixed me with her steady, ink-dark gaze. Memorize them. Later, settled into the small, slightly damp office allocated to me deep within the archive wing, a labyrinth of towering metal shelves groaning under the weight of forgotten history. I read Section 3, Environmental and Patron Anomalies. My professional skepticism warred with a rising tide of unease. Procedure 3.1, Acoustic Variances. The text was chillingly bland, due to unique structural properties. Auditory phenomena mimicking footfalls may occasionally be perceived, emanating from the ceiling voids. Particularly after dusk, there is no accessible upper floor in the main wings. Staff are advised to disregard these sounds and refrain from visually inspecting the ceiling area during such occurrences. Disregard footsteps from nowhere. Refrain from visually inspecting. My historian's soul rebelled against ignoring potential hidden architecture. Yet the finality felt absolute. Procedure 3.2. Reading Room Protocol. The central reading table requires 4 place settings to be verified daily before closing. This honors the Athenaeum's 4 founding families and ensures ambient equilibrium, 4 families. My initial research indicated Alistair Orpheus, I was the sole founder. And ambient equilibrium. It felt like coded language for something far stranger than honoring tradition. I pictured the table I'd glimpsed. Yes, 4 pristine place settings had gleamed expectantly in the gloom. Procedure 3.3. Horological irregularities. This was the most bizarre. The Seth Thomas regulator clock in the main hall is of unpredictable temperament. Should the clock, at any hour, produce 13 consecutive chimes, staff must immediately seek shelter by crouching beneath the central reading table. Remain entirely silent, controlling respiration, until the final chime's resonance hash completely ceased. A mandated structural vibration precaution. 13 chimes. Hide under a table. Hold your breath. The structural precaution excuse was laughably thin. An attempt to drape mundane procedure over something deeply abnormal. I closed the booklet, the scent of old paper clinging to my fingers. The rules were insane. Yet, Ms. Vance's gravity. The palpable weight of centuries pressing down in this silent place. The memory of my past professional failure. They conspired to demand compliance. I would follow the procedures, meticulously, without deviation. That was the path to redemption here. As I stood to begin my preliminary shelf survey, a heavy, leather-bound folio suddenly slid from a high shelf several aisles away, landing on the floor not with a crash, but with a soft, decisive thump, followed by the faint, dry whisper of settling pages. I froze, straining my ears. No footsteps. No draft strong enough to move such a volume. I peered down the long, shadowed aisle. Empty. Just rows upon rows of silent books, holding their breath. The Orpheus Athenaeum had offered its first quiet greeting, and the rules suddenly felt less like eccentricities, and more like the only map I had through a deeply haunted territory. The silence pressed in, thick with waiting knowledge. My first official week dissolved into a blur of dust, archival acid-free folders, and the towering silent presence of the bookshelves. The Orpheus Athenaeum didn't operate like any library I'd ever known. It felt less like a repository of knowledge, and more like a vast sleeping organism. Its breaths the slow settling of ancient paper. Its dreams the fragmented histories moldering in forgotten corners. I established a rhythm, cataloging the Orpheus family's mundane financial ledgers first, trying to ground myself in the ordinary before tackling the more esoteric materials hinted at in the collection index. But the house, the library, wouldn't allow for simple routine. Anomalies persisted, subtle but undeniable. Books I meticulously aligned would be found slightly askew hours later. Cold spots drifted like unseen currents through apparently draft-free rooms, the chill lingering on my skin long after I moved away. And sounds. The soft, dry whisper of a page turning from an empty aisle. A faint, almost inaudible sighing resonance that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves in the late afternoon. I documented them all in my private journal, cross-referencing times with my work log, searching for patterns, clinging to the methodology of my profession as a shield against the encroaching sense of the impossible. My initial research into the Orpheus family yielded portraits of wealth, intellect, and deep eccentricity. Alistair Orpheus I, the founder, wrote extensively on Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, and theories I could only describe as architectural consciousness, the idea that buildings, especially libraries, could develop a form of sentience through the accumulated weight of knowledge and human thought they contained. His wife Cassandra's poetry grew progressively darker, obsessed with themes of reflection, stillness, and being read by unseen eyes. The records concerning the children, Lyra and Theseus, remained frustratingly vague, official death dates contradicted by later, oblique references in Alistair's philosophical tracts. It was late one evening, working in a secluded research carrel in the main reading room, a privilege Miss Vance had granted, with a look that mingled permission with warning. That Rule 1 presented itself undeniably. The reading room was vast, cathedral-like, pools of warm lamplight scattered amidst islands of profound shadow. Only one other person occupied the immense space, an elderly man with a shock of white hair, bent low over a large vellum-bound manuscript at a heavy table across the room. I'd noticed him when I came in hours earlier, a figure of scholarly absorption, needing a specific reference volume. I pushed back my chair, the sound loud in the hush, and walked towards the nearest reference shelf. My path took me closer to the old man's table. As I passed, I glanced over, expecting to see him turn a page, make a note. He was utterly still. His eyes, magnified slightly by thick spectacles, were fixed on the intricate script of the manuscript. Wide, unwavering, unblinking. My steps faltered. I stopped, pretending to examine a nearby bookshelf, but my attention was riveted on him. Minutes passed. He didn't move a muscle, didn't shift his weight, didn't breathe, as far as I could tell, and his eyes remained open, fixed, reflecting the lamplight with a glassy, doll-like stare. Rule 1. If a patron has been reading the same page for over an hour, don't disturb them. Their eyes no longer blink for a reason. He'd been like this for hours. A reason. The phrase echoed with chilling implication. This wasn't sleep or intense concentration. This was something else. A state of being I couldn't comprehend, linked intrinsically to the text before him. My professional instinct warred with a visceral, primal fear. Check on him. Offer assistance? Or obey the cryptic, terrifying rule? The air around his table felt different. Colder, yes, but also strangely dense, as if charged with static electricity. A low, almost subsonic hum seemed to emanate from the book itself, a sound I felt more in my teeth than heard with my ears. I forced myself to turn away, abandoning my search for the reference book. Walking briskly, heart pounding a heavy rhythm against my ribs, I left the reading room, pulling the heavy oak door quietly shut behind me. I didn't look back. Later, much later, peering cautiously into the reading room before leaving for the night. The chair was empty. The vellum manuscript lay closed on the table. No sign of the elderly scholar. Had he simply finished and left, or had the book finished with him? As I walked through the main hall towards the exit, the first real rain of autumn began to beat against the high-arched windows. My gaze fell on the floor near the base of the silent grandfather clock. Lying there, looking starkly out of place on the polished marble, was a single, pressed white camellia, perfectly preserved, despite the season being long past for such blooms. The camellia vanished by morning, leaving only a faint ghost image on the marble where condensation had gathered around it. I didn't mention it, nor the unblinking reader, to Miss Vance. My attempts to glean information from her were met with polite, impenetrable deflection. She spoke of respecting the unique research habits of Athenaeum patrons and the complex atmospheric conditions of the aging building. Her calm demeanor making me feel like the one succumbing to paranoia. My research intensified, fueled now by genuine fear rather than just historical curiosity. I focused on patron records, cross-referencing long-term access logs with city archives, vital records, even old newspaper missing persons reports. The pattern that emerged was deeply disturbing. Dozens of individuals over the past century, scholars, researchers, solitary eccentrics, granted extended access to the Athenaeum's collections who subsequently faded from public life. Some had official death records years later, often from vague causes or listed as unattended. Others simply ceased to exist in any verifiable records after their last recorded visit here. They hadn't just stopped coming. They had vanished from the world outside these walls. The library felt different now. Every quiet patron browsed the stack seemed like a potential candidate for Rule 1. Every dusty tome felt like it might be passively feeding on its reader. The silence no longer felt peaceful, but predatory. The very air seemed thick with lost time, shed like skin by those who lingered too long. It was during a busy afternoon while I was assisting patrons at the main catalog terminal near the entrance that Rule 2 found me. A young woman approached, clutching a thin volume of symbolist poetry, her eyes wide with a genuine, almost childlike confusion. She looked pale, her simple dress vaguely reminiscent of styles from decades past, perhaps a deliberate affectation, I told myself, common among students from the nearby university. "Excuse me," she began, her voice soft with a slight, unplaceable accent. "I'm terribly sorry, this place is rather overwhelming. I seem to have completely lost track of things." She gestured vaguely towards the poetry stacks. "Could you possibly tell me?" Her brow furrowed deeper. "How long have I been here today? I can't seem to recall when I arrived at all." Rule 2. If someone asks how long they've been here, lie. My stomach plunged. Her distress was palpable, her confusion seemingly authentic. Telling her the truth, that I hadn't seen her before this moment, that her question itself was a terrifying red flag according to the house rules, felt impossibly cruel. What damage would that truth inflict on a mind already adrift? But lying felt like complicity, like helping the library maintain its temporal illusions. Her wide, dark eyes searched mine, waiting for an anchor. I forced a smile, praying it looked reassuring. "Oh, time flies when you're lost in poetry, doesn't it?" I said, keeping my voice light, conversational. "Let's see, I think I noticed you browse near the Rossetti collection maybe just after lunch, say 1:30 or 2. The lie felt clumsy on my tongue, the details arbitrary, meaningless. Relief washed over her face, but it didn't quite settle in her eyes, which still held a shadow of deep disorientation. "Oh," she breathed. "Lunchtime, truly." It felt. She trailed off, shaking her head slightly as if trying to clear fog. "Thank you. Thank you so much." She clutched a poetry book like a talisman and drifted back towards the stacks, casting a bewildered glance towards the tall windows where the late afternoon sun slanted through, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I watched her disappear between the towering shelves. The guilt, a bitter taste in my mouth. Had I just condemned her further by reinforcing the library's lie? How long had she really been wandering these aisles? Days, decade. Was she slowly becoming one of the unblinking readers herself? Later that day, feeling restless, I sought out Professor Finch, the elderly, seemingly benign regular I sometimes saw in the rare books room. He was dozing lightly in a leather armchair, a volume of Herodotus resting on his lap. I hesitated, then cleared my throat softly. He blinked awake, adjusting his spectacles, offering a gentle smile. "Ah, Miss Vance. Deep in the archives today, trying to be." "Professor," I said, opting for an oblique approach. "It's remarkable how time seems to slip away in here." Finch chuckled softly, a dry, papery sound. "Indeed, the Athenaeum has always had its own peculiar relationship with chronology. One must be careful not to lose one's place entirely." His eyes twinkled, but behind the amusement, I thought I detected a flicker of something else. Warning? Sadness? Easy to become just another footnote in its catalog, wouldn't you say? He picked up his Herodotus again. A clear dismissal, a footnote in the catalog. The phrase echoed long after I left him. Was that what shelving meant? That evening, as I performed the Rule 2 ritual, verifying the 4 place settings in the cold, silent reading room, my hand paused over the 4th setting, the one nearest the windows. Resting beside the polished fork was a small, intricately carved ivory bookmark I hadn't noticed before. It depicted Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, a symbol of cycles and eternity. I didn't touch it, just backed away slowly. The library was leaving gifts now, or warnings. The discovery of the Ouroboros bookmark solidified my resolve. The library wasn't just passively absorbing patrons. It felt like an active intelligence, observing, reacting, perhaps even communicating through these unsettling intrusions. My research became laser-focused. I needed to understand the shelving process mentioned in Rule 3, the duplicate faces. Elias Orpheus's journals spoke cryptically of archival echoes and imperfect reflections, manifesting during periods of high textual saturation or weakened chronological stability. He theorized the library, in its drive to catalog everything, sometimes inadvertently copied or shelved, the psychic imprint of its most absorbed readers, creating autonomous but incomplete echoes that lingered in the stacks. These echoes, he warned, were dangerous because they lacked the original's context, existing only as fragments of knowledge or emotion, potentially disruptive to the library's ambient equilibrium. His notes trailed off into complex equations and diagrams referencing the regulator clock and scheduled reconciliation. Was Rule 3, locking the doors, meant to contain these echoes until the clock purged them? Miss Vance became even more guarded. When I presented my findings on patron disappearances potentially linked to specific rare books dealing with memory or identity, she cut me off sharply. Miss Vance, your remit is the Orpheus family archives. The management of current patrons and general collection stability falls under my purview and established Athenaeum Procedures. Confine your inquiries accordingly. Her tone was ice, leaving no room for argument, but her eyes held a flicker of something that looked almost like fear. Feeling increasingly isolated, trapped between Vance's obstruction and the library's encroaching strangeness, I decided to methodically catalog a notoriously neglected wing. Alchemical manuscripts and hermetic texts. It was deep in the building's oldest section, rarely visited, dust lying thick as snow, the air heavy with the scent of brittle paper and unknown chemical residues. The silence here was absolute, unnerving. I worked my way down a narrow aisle stacked high with crumbling folios bound in strange leather. Turning a corner, I saw someone at the far end, partially obscured by a towering shelf. A man, bent over a large open volume on a reading stand. I recognized him, Professor Finch. Strange to see him back here. He usually stayed in the main reading room. I noted his distinctive tweed jacket with leather elbow patches and the way he habitually pushed his spectacles up his nose. Focused on my work, I continued down the aisle. Reaching the end, I turned into the next parallel aisle, planning to work my way back. I took perhaps 10 steps and froze. Standing at the other end of this aisle, also bent over a large volume on a stand, was Professor Finch. Same tweed jacket, same spectacles pushed up his nose, same posture of intense concentration. My mind struggled to process the impossibility. He could not physically have moved from the end of the previous aisle to the end of this one in the few seconds it took me to turn the corner. Especially not without making a sound. He was in two places at once. Rule 3. If you find two people with the same face sitting in different aisles, lock the doors. One of them was shelved. Shelved. An echo made solid. An imperfect copy. Panic, cold and clean, sliced through me. Which one was Finch? Sliced through me. Which one was Finch? Which was the echo? Did the echo know it was a copy? Was it dangerous? Lock the doors. Immediately. Heart hammering against my ribs so hard it felt bruised. I turned, forcing myself to move silently, quickly, back the way I came, out of the alchemy wing, through the silent connecting corridors, towards the main hall. Every shadow seemed to menace. Every creak felt like pursuit. Was the original Finch still there? Had the echo detached? Was it following me? I reached the vast, empty main hall. The massive oak front door seemed miles away. My footsteps, silent on the archive's dusty carpet, echoed loudly now on the cold marble. I ran the last few yards, fumbling with the first of the heavy ornate brass bolts. It slid home with a loud, resonant thunk that echoed like a gunshot in the stillness. Rushing to the second door, my hands shaking, I shot the bolt across. Another heavy thud secured the entrance. Locked in. Trapped inside the Athenaeum with a duplicated patron, an archived consciousness. I leaned against the cold oak, gasping for breath, staring back into the shadowed depths of the library. What had I just contained? And was I protecting the outside world, or merely ensuring I was alone with the danger? My eyes were drawn inevitably to the grandfather clock standing silent sentinel against the far wall. Its hands remained frozen, pendulum still, but as I watched, holding my breath, a faint, almost inaudible tick sounded from within its casing, followed by a low preparatory whirring noise, the sound of ancient dust-clogged gears beginning to engage. Oh God, saying the duplicate hadn't just been a Rule 3 trigger. It had woken the clock. Elias Orpheus's notes flashed in my mind. Imperfect copies. Must reinforce the catalog's integrity. Only the regulator can reconcile the echoes. The reconciliation was starting. And the clock, I knew with horrifying certainty, was preparing to strike 13. The low internal whirring of the grandfather clock escalated into a series of distinct, heavy mechanical preparations. The groan of ancient weights shifting within its tall casing echoing through the cavernous main hall. It was no longer dormant. The reconciliation cycle, hinted at in Elias Orpheus' eyes' mad scrawls, was beginning. Triggered, I knew with sickening certainty, by the appearance of Professor Finch's duplicate, the shelved echo I had locked inside with me. There was no time for fear to paralyze, only time to react according to the final desperate piece of lore I'd pieced together. Rule 3 demanded I hide beneath the dining table during the clock's impossible chime, but Elias's journal spoke of more. Of the chime's function as a temporal resonance purge, and of specific symbols acting as anchors or redirectors. My only chance wasn't just to hide, but to attempt to interfere, to rewrite the protocol while the system was in flux. My feet pounded on the cold marble as I raced from the main hall towards the immense reading room, the clock's slow, deliberate tick-tock having suddenly, unnervingly begun, counting down the seconds to the first chime. I burst into the reading room, the four-place settings on the great oak table gleaming like ghostly invitations in the dim, ambient light filtering from the high windows. Just as I dropped and scrambled beneath the table's heavy shadow, pulling myself against the dusty central pedestal, the first deep bronze chime struck. The sound filled the room, vibrating through the floor, through the dense wood above me. 1, the air grew instantly colder. 2, each chime was a physical weight, pressing down. 3, I took a final, ragged breath, held it tight in my aching lungs. 4, 5, 6. The world outside the tablecloth vanished. My reality shrank to this dusty, cold space, the rhythmic tolling counting down like a ritual drumbeat. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. A pause, a silent stretch taut, vibrating with potential energy. Then, the 13th chime, a jarring, discordant clang, deeper and harsher than the others, resonated through the Athenaeum, a sound that felt fundamentally wrong, like a crack appearing in the fabric of time itself. It hung in the air, heavy and oppressive, before finally receding into utter stillness. Hold your breath. Now. I pressed my face to the floorboards, tasting dust, squeezing my eyes shut against the darkness beneath the table. Immediately, an intense wave of frigid cold surged into the room, silent but palpable, washing over the floor, under the table, stealing all warmth. It carried the faint, dry scent of decay and something else. something indescribably ancient. Then came the sounds, not loud, but infinitely unsettling. The soft, dry rustle of unseen fabric, like heavy robes or brittle winding sheets, dragging slowly across the marble. Multiple sets of faint, sighing breaths, thin and dry, overlapping, seeming to come from different corners of the room at once. A slow, almost processional dragging cadence, the sound suggesting more than one entity moving with deliberate weight. The quartet, and perhaps the Finch echo, drawn into the reconciliation. They circled the room beyond my hiding place. The pressure built, making my ears ache, the silence thick and suffocating. Above me, the heavy oak table emitted a low groaning sound, vibrating as if immense weight were leaning against it, or perhaps as unseen hands brushed its surface near the waiting place settings. My lungs burned. Spots danced behind my eyes. Resonance requires reception. Temporal redirection. Elias's notes. Now or never. With a surge of adrenaline overriding the terror, my right hand, trembling violently, moved against the thick dust on the floorboards directly in front of me, focusing my entire will, pouring intent into the action despite the screaming need for air. I began to trace the complex, multi-pointed, interwoven symbol I had copied from Elias' journal. The sigil he believed could anchor or redirect the clock's reconciling energy. The moment my finger completed the final intricate loop, the charged atmosphere under the table snapped. The whispering sighs outside the tablecloth escalated into sharp, overlapping hisses of confusion or anger. A distinct, chilling gasp, thin and dry, sounded from immediately above me, near the edge of the table. The cold, which had been pervasive, now focused like a spotlight directly onto the symbol I had drawn, onto me, pressing down with agonizing intensity. Then, from the tabletop directly overhead, the clear, delicate ring of crystal resonated softly, as if a goblet had been touched. It chimed once, questioning, before being abruptly silenced. The presences hesitated. The rustling stopped. The dragging sounds paused. It felt like the entire library held its breath again, confused by my interference. The cold presence directly above felt like it was leaning down, probing the darkness beneath the table, its scrutiny a palpable force. I could smell dust, decay, and faintly now the scent of old tweed and pipe tobacco. Finch's echo. My vision grayed. My lungs felt like they were collapsing. I had to breathe. Just as I reached my breaking point, the focused cold presence above me abruptly withdrew, as if pulled back. The rustling sounds resumed, but seemed ragged, disorganized. The sighing breaths were fewer now, uneven. The dragging cadence became hesitant, almost stumbling, moving away from the table, back towards the main hall, faster than before, less processional, more like a route. The sounds retreated down the echoing corridor. From the direction of the main hall, the grandfather clock emitted a final, low, mechanical groan, like stripped gears or immense effort concluding, followed by a soft but distinct settling click, and then silence, a silence that felt empty, cleansed perhaps, but also deeply disturbed. The unnatural cold dissipated quickly, leaving only the cool dampness of the old building. I stayed under the table, gasping, drawing in huge lungfuls of dusty air until the burning subsided. My body shook with reaction. Slowly, cautiously, I pushed myself up, peering out from under the heavy tablecloth. The reading room was empty. The moonlight streamed through the windows onto the four-place settings, undisturbed. I crawled out, legs weak, muscles aching. I looked down at the floor where I had hidden. The dust was thick, undisturbed. The symbol I had traced with such desperate intent was completely gone, as if wiped clean by the receding energy. I stood alone in the vast, silent room. The 13th chime had passed. The reconciliation, whatever it truly was, had occurred. But I hadn't just hidden. I had interfered. I had whispered a name, traced a symbol, altered the resonance based on the mad theories of the library's founder. Standing there in the aftermath, the library felt profoundly different, still ancient, still deeply strange. But the oppressive weight of its unchanging ritual felt fractured. I had perhaps opened the book of its rules and scribbled a tentative, dangerous new footnote. What grew from that revision remained terrifyingly unclear. The silence that descended after the grandfather clock's final, settling groan was different. The oppressive weight that accompanied the 13th chime's resonance had lifted, but the air in the reading room remained unnaturally cold, thin, and carried a distinct charge, like the electric stillness after a nearby lightning strike. Beneath the heavy oak table, I took several deep, shuddering breaths. The taste of dust sharp in my throat. My heart still hammered, but the blind terror was slowly receding, replaced by a trembling, hyper-aware state of shock and dawning realization. I had interfered. I had traced the symbol, whispered the name Lenore in my mind as I did so. A desperate addition based on her prominence in the journals. And something had changed. The withdrawal of the presences felt ragged, disrupted. The chillingly unified quartet seemed for a moment confused, perhaps even fractured. Cautiously, I crawled out from my hiding place, muscles aching from tension. The reading room was bathed in the weak moonlight filtering through the tall arched windows. The four-place settings on the table gleamed, seemingly undisturbed. I approached hesitantly. Everything looked identical. The heavy silver, the clouded crystal, the porcelain plates. Except at the setting traditionally associated with Lenore Orpheus in family portraits. The one nearest the large bay window. The small, intricately carved ivory Ouroboros bookmark I'd found previously now lay directly on top of the folded napkin. I hadn't put it there. It had been on my research desk upstairs. A shiver traced its way down my spine. Acknowledgement? A warning? Or just another layer of the library's inscrutable communication? Over the next 24 hours, the library felt suspended. The usual subtle anomalies, drifting cold spots, faint whispers, seemed muted, paused. Even the predictable footsteps failed to materialize overhead after dusk fell. It was as if my intervention during the 13th chime had thrown the entire system into a state of temporary shock, disrupting its ancient, ingrained rhythms. This quiet was almost more unnerving than the activity. It felt like the prelude to a different kind of storm. Armed with my experience, Elias Orpheus Eyes journal, and the Ouroboros bookmark, which I now carried, feeling its smooth coolness against my palm, I sought out Miss Vance in her office the following afternoon. She looked up as I entered, her usually impassive face showing surprise, quickly masked. "Miss Vance, you appear unharmed. There was a Rule 3 clock event last night, Miss Vance," I stated directly, holding her gaze. Her lips thinned. "I am aware of the chronometric irregularity. I trust you followed procedure." I sheltered beneath the reading room table, I confirmed. But I didn't remain entirely passive. Bazet, the first journals regarding resonance and redirection. I interacted. I recounted tracing the symbol, focusing on Lenore's name, the changed withdrawal of the presences, the appearance of the bookmark. Miss Vance listened, her face growing paler with each word. When I finished, she stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Fear, anger, maybe even a flicker of awe. "You altered the reconciliation protocol?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I believe so," I said. Elias's notes suggested it was possible. She sank back into her chair, looking suddenly frail. "For generations," she murmured, almost to herself, "we have simply endured it, maintained the rituals Elias established. Containment through appeasement and avoidance. No one has dared interfere with the primary cycle. She looked at me then, her eyes sharp again. Do you understand what you might have done, Miss Vance? These rules, as you call them, weren't arbitrary. They were the result of Elias's desperate attempts to stabilize a breach he inadvertently created or widened with his research. They maintain a fragile, dangerous equilibrium by altering the resonance by directly addressing one part of the quartet. You may have weakened the containment structure itself. You may have made things infinitely worse, or... I countered softly, placing the Ouroboros bookmark on her desk. Maybe I've shown that the structure can be altered, that blind adherence isn't the only option. Maybe understanding offers a different form of control. She stared at the bookmark, then at me. A long silence stretched. Elias, I spoke of a keystone text. She said finally, her voice low, resigned. A volume detailing the library's true genesis, its relationship with the family, and the theoretical underpinnings of his protocols. It has remained sealed in the restricted archives, deemed too dangerous, too destabilizing by my predecessors. She made a decision then, visible in the sudden squaring of her shoulders. Perhaps its time has come. If you have altered the equation, then the old methods may no longer suffice. You need the full context. She unlocked a heavy ornate drawer in her desk and retrieved a single antique brass key. The Orpheus Prime Archive, she said, handing it to me. Deepest level. Be warned, Miss Vance. Some knowledge is not stabilizing. It is corrosive. What you learn there may bind you to this place as surely as any rule. I took the key. Its metal cold against my palm. I understand. I doubt you do, she replied softly. But you have forced the library's hand, and perhaps mine. Go, see if your understanding offers salvation, or merely a more informed damnation. Leaving her office, key clutched tight, I felt the weight of centuries settle upon me. I had survived the rules, even bent one. But I had also stepped irrevocably onto a new path, deeper into the heart of the Orpheus Athenaeum's mystery. The silence of the library seemed to watch me, no longer just waiting, but anticipating. The Orpheus Prime Archive was less a room and more a vault, hidden behind false shelving in the deepest sub-level, the air thick with the scent of undisturbed dust and ancient preservation chemicals. The key Miss Vance gave me opened a lock of staggering complexity. Inside, illuminated only by my flashlight beam, rested a single massive ledger bound in dark, unidentifiable leather, cold to the touch. The Athenaeum Catalog Raisonnean Operating Protocols. Ball-Eye, Alastair, Orpheus, Founder. Months melted away in that vault, and in the main library above, as I painstakingly cross-referenced the catalog with Elias's journals, Cassandra's poetry, town records, and my own meticulous observations, Miss Vance left me largely undisturbed. Our interactions brief, formal exchanges of archival data, though I sometimes felt her watching me from the shadows of the upper galleries. The truth, when pieced together, was stranger and sadder than I could have imagined. The Athenaeum wasn't just built on strange ground. Elias the Thuric pursuits had incorporated principles of mnemonic architectures and chronological resonance, intending the library itself to be a vast engine for accessing and archiving not just knowledge but consciousness, specifically the echoes of his tragically lost family, Lenore, Isabel, Thomas, and perhaps a fourth aspect, representing his own overwhelming grief and guilt, forming the quartet. The rules weren't just for staff safety. They were parameters designed by Elias to maintain the specific emotional resonance loop that kept the quartet archived, but contained. The 13th Chime was the system's periodic, forceful defragmentation and re-anchoring ritual. My intervention hadn't broken the system, but it had introduced a new variable, conscious, informed interaction based on empathy for Lenore and Elias's own redirection sigils. It had proven the echoes weren't just passive data. They could be influenced, their loop potentially altered. Armed with this terrifying, profound knowledge, my role shifted. I was no longer just an archivist. I became, with Miss Vance's tacit, wary acknowledgement, the library's de facto psychoarchaeologist, a mediator, attempting to navigate its haunted operating system. Life in the Athenaeum found a new, strange equilibrium. The rules still held sway, but my application of them changed. When the slow, heavy footsteps sounded overhead, I no longer simply ignored them. Consulting Elias's notes on harmonic frequencies, I might play a specific low-resonant tone on a tuning fork app on my phone, or quietly read a specific passage from Cassandra's poetry aloud in the room below. Often the footsteps would falter, then cease, the oppressive weight lifting. The dining table remained set for 4, but the settings were no longer static. Based on journals detailing the children's interests or Lenore's preferences, I rotated small offerings, a specific type of pressed flower, a polished seashell, a page of complex mathematics, the Ouroboros bookmark. It felt less like appeasement and more like conversation, a quiet acknowledgement of their individuality beyond the tragedy. The violent physical manifestations ceased entirely. When a lost-looking patron inevitably asked about time, I still couldn't tell them the full truth, but armed with Elias's theories on subjective chronology within the library, I offered nuanced responses. Time can feel rather fluid within these walls, don't you find? Perhaps focus on the chapter, not the clock. More often than not, the answer seemed to soothe the deeper temporal anxiety, allowing them to re-engage with their reading, or eventually find their way out. And the clock. As the date for the next 13th Chime approached, I didn't just prepare to hide. I prepared to mediate. Based on the catalogue raisonné, I identified specific resonant objects, books bound with certain materials, geological samples from the library's foundation, and placed them strategically around the reading room table before taking shelter. When the chime struck and the presences arrived, I still held my breath, but I focused my intent, using techniques derived from Elias's notes on conscious anchoring, attempting to provide a stable, neutral reception rather than just fearful silence, while the placed objects absorbed or redirected the worst of the reconciliation energy. It was terrifying, exhausting work, leaving me drained for days. But the subsequent settling period in the library felt calmer, less volatile. It's not a cure. The haunting isn't gone. The Orpheus Athenaeum remains a place saturated with grief, existing slightly outside normal time and reality. Miss Vance and I maintain a relationship of wary professional respect. She guards the library's physical integrity and its secrets from the outside world. I navigate its internal psychic landscape, using knowledge as my guide, constantly learning, constantly adapting. Tonight, the library is quiet. Rain whispers against the tall windows, overlooking the Providence night. I sit in the reading room, reviewing facsimiles of Elias's celestial charts, comparing them to upcoming astronomical events. A soft rustling sound comes from the darkened stacks nearby. Just the house settling, or perhaps one of the quartet drawing near. I pause, listen intently, then dip my head in brief acknowledgement before returning to my work. I am bound to this place, not by bars, but by knowledge, by the responsibility that comes with understanding, and by the rules I continue to decipher, and sometimes cautiously rewrite. The book of the Athenaeum remains open, and I am, for better or worse, now writing my own chapter within its ancient haunted pages. The soft, rhythmic turning of a page somewhere in the darkness is the only sound that breaks the silence.